want to thank you all for joining BASI Live and our Fireside Chat series. I want to try and bring an inspiring guest every month so that we can meet together. I want the conversations to be informal, informative. So weigh in, ask questions, join the chat. Let's make it inspiring for all. You know, I have just found, those who know me know that I was quite hesitant to use online platforms extensively, but I find them so inspiring to be with you all, to be in your homes, to see you all, to see your faces, to be with you one-on-one. I'm with each one of you one-on-one, and I absolutely love it. I find it so inspiring. And for a brief moment, we are together, we put our arms around each other, we embrace each other, we bring the planet together. I am infinitely inspired by that. So thank you. If there can be one little silver lining from COVID-19, this is it, that we can all be together for this moment. Our guest today, and I'm not yet sure if our guest has in fact joined us, but our guest today is Mr. John Steele, the author of Caged Lion. And John's book is all about the legacy of Joseph Pilates. And I thought, what a great way to kick off the legacy program, to introduce it by going back to the source with a first-hand account from John Steele. And I wanted to bring him here for all of us to ask questions. I have so many questions. I seldom write notes. You all know I seldom write notes. I wrote notes because I know if I don't write notes today, we will all be here for many hours. But you know what made me so excited about inviting John is that we Pilates professionals have very little direct contact with the man who created a system that we live by. Every day of our lives, we live by a system created by a man, and yet each of us has very little contact, direct contact with that person. I was very fortunate to spend time with Ron Fletcher, with Romana Krzyzanowska, Eve Gentry, and my dear friend and mentor, Kathy Grant. So I feel in many ways I got to know Joe, but I got to know him secondhand through stories. And John's account, his book, Caged Lion, was such a profound read for me because in many ways it fortified the stories that I had heard secondhand. It validated many of my own personal feelings. And I found it illuminated facts that I did not know, particularly the early years. Well, John, I gave you a wonderful introduction, far more lengthy than I expected, but we're finally together.
Thank you.
I welcomed you. I did, in very brief, tell everyone how much I enjoyed your book. I found it profound, honest, authentic, very personal, which I must say for me, that what was so important. And despite the many books that have been written on my own, there was a great void, and that void was your voice, the voice that can bring that personal connection to a man that, in a sense, we devote our lives to and we know so little about. And you have filled that void. I thank you for filling that void. I thank you for providing such a personal account of your years with Mr. Pilates. I actually restricted myself to notes today, John, which is very unique for me because otherwise I would bombard you with far too many questions. And many of my questions are probing. They're not only about exercises, they're about the man. And but we have had our first question already. However, I'm going to stall and ask you to introduce yourself, welcome you to what we call BASI Live and our fireside chats. And it is truly a pleasure and an honor to have you with us, John.
Well, you know, it's a great pleasure for me as well, Rael. I mean, we've made contact in a lot of PMAs, but I think this is the first conversation we're ever having, and pretty nice to start off with your wonderful introduction. Basically, you know, I kind of fell into all of this involuntarily, not against my will, except at the first meeting with Joe. But there was nothing in my mind about trying to perpetuate Pilates, Contrology, Joe's legacy. I just kept doing it because there was something about the Contrology or the Pilates I was doing that I personally wanted to keep doing. When the book came around, or the idea of writing a book, which happened about in 2007 at the right after a PMA where I was selected to be the keynote speaker, and I ended up with they're horrible feelings at that time. No one, I should say 75% actually didn't know Joe Pilates was a person. And they thought, the few that did know thought he was still alive, a good part of them. There were very few that had any understanding of the person that had sort of changed my life and helped me get through a lot of bad stuff. And so that's what started the impetus for the book. But again, it was just, I had to get it off my chest, probably a good bit of that. Was it a feeling that maybe I could bring him to life again, in the sense of all of you who teach it and who have made it what it is today? I mean, it isn't, it doesn't work without everybody. It has to have everybody. It's one of those things that you need the teaching, you need the equipment, you need the entrepreneurial courage to open a studio and spend money and buy equipment. And but in that mix, where was Joe? So that's what was the first impetus for the book. And then as I wrote it, I really started to learn a lot about my curiosity just kept digging. I learned about things about him that I had no idea. And I try to learn, you know, why did I do this? I try to learn about myself. What was it here that made me, go back? And I'm sure a lot of you have that same question. Why do your clients come back? It's not easy. It's expensive. It's hard work. It's, you know, this isn't tennis or golf. It's work. And the biography, of course, was extremely disturbing, like it was to you, Rael. I mean, how did this all happen? There's no clue. So that's what got the book going. And then the book, of course, had its own demands on me. It just kept me going. And that's where we are today, in for me, a really fantastic position. I think I understand myself a little better from doing all of this. I think I understand my dedication to Pilates, why I did it and do it, and what it means to me. And listen, it gives me, these things are fun for me. These webinars, once we get connected. It's not fun with the techno problems, but once we get, it's a lot of fun. It's great speaking to everyone. And,
Absolutely.
you know, I really miss that people could get out and have a convention here and there and get together and talk about these things. But this is not a bad substitute. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to do this.
Great. Well,
But I'm ready for your questions.
absolutely. I'm ready to ask them. I do want to say, John, that we are better as a community, as human beings for your book. It is a wonderful book. I found it personal, but never self-indulgent, cathartic, but not overly, again, indulgent, self-reflecting. It was just a wonderful read. I started, I could not put it down. It filled so many gaps for me personally. We are better as a community. It will be certainly recommended, if not required reading. And I seldom require reading, but this is essential for our students, for the community to know about. It really gives us a wonderful, unbiased background, a beautiful account, John. So congratulations on a great book. He asked a really good question that's come to mind for me many times. And I know Kathy Grant spoke sometimes about books that Joseph Pilates, Mr. Pilates, recommended to her. Jonathan was asking particularly those early formative years when he was in England. Did he speak about who his influences were, who his teachers were, what books he read, what philosophies was he influenced by? There were so many prominent movers at that time, and Jonathan and myself, and I'm sure you know, movement doesn't just happen. Knowledge of the body doesn't just happen, as much as we like to think that people are prodigies and somehow the information just falls into their heads. It doesn't. It's years and years of reading, evolving, practicing, trying. And Jonathan wanted to know if he spoke about those formative years and who his influences were.
Well, the answer to that is no. We never spoke about that. One of the challenges I had when I wrote the book is Joe never spoke about yesterday or anything before. It was always right then. It was 99 out of 100 contrology. He never ever gave credit to anyone else. If you even mentioned something like, Joe, it was anything related to yoga here? I mean, he'd go crazy. No. So and when you were in his apartment, now people have said that he was a reader. He read. If he did, he hid the books, because I never saw a book in that apartment or a magazine or anything. He could have, and he could have been behind a curtain or in a drawer or behind a shelf. But no, I never saw anything he read. When I started to, get curious about where did this thing come from? Because I agree with you, Rael. All of a sudden, Beethoven doesn't jump up. He jumps up because Bach had jumped up, and Bach jumped up because someone else jumped up, and Picasso didn't all of a sudden appear. He appeared after a whole series of people. And the beforehand story ends when he first went to Great Britain and he got captured, as his friends said, or got incarcerated. Before that, all he was a brewer's assistant. He boxed as a hobby. He had a boxing club that he was a member of, which was illegal in Germany at the time, and he got caught at it. But there's no evidence of him ever trying to teach anything or do anything. And he, in his summary, he says his mother, he said in certain interviews, mother was a naturopath. Not true. His father was a gymnast and a gym, could have gone to an athletic club. German men did do that frequently in the late 18th century. They went to gymnasiums and worked out, and were very vigorous, because they ate so many sandwiches and drank so much beer during the day. They had to do something. They'd all died at 40, but there's no evidence that anyone's found of any real connection to anything athletic or gymnastic or anything like that. So here I am struggling. You say, where did contrology come from? It didn't drop out of the sky. And I concluded that it came from being in jail, being incarcerated, that he was a vain person about his body. Even then, there's no question about that. He tried to model at one point, and he had nothing to do in a jail, and he began to focus on his body, and he focused on doing exercises. And it wasn't, Nakaloo prison was not like you see on television or in the movies about American prisons with the yard every day, and the men and the women go out into the yard and they play basketball or volleyball. No, they didn't have any of that stuff. There were some calisthenics in the morning, but other than that, they were prisoners of war. The Brits are, struggling to stay alive as a country, and they're not taking great care of these people, and they're not trying to bring them back to society. They're just trying to keep them out of killing themselves. So I think he spent a lot of time on his cot, trying to figure out how his body worked, how to get exercise, and how to stay healthy. And I do think, to a great extent, he did have or develop a very important, a very deep understanding of how his body worked. And that's what he used to apply to ordinary calisthenics, ordinary exercises, ordinary movements. I mean, they're all very strange when you don't see them before, but once you do these movements and think about them, they're things that you do in life. I mean, they're not, this is not the jumping up in the air in ballet and doing 3 or 4 things with your feet before you get back down on the ground. This is stuff that everyone does. They don't know it. And that's where I think it came from, Rael. I don't think it was an orderly process of where he took a great deal of learning and added to it. And the reformer and his gadgets are similarly out of the blue. There's nothing. I was a patent lawyer when I first started out, a litigator, and all we ever tried to do is find out the prior art so we could say, oh, he didn't invent that. It was invented by the guy before him. He just added a little something to it. I couldn't find anything that indicated Joe didn't invent that. He did.
I am going to start from the beginning and work through your book, and we'll take some questions from the audience. And by the way, John, we have, I'm not sure exactly how many people. We've got around 100 people, and they are scattered around the globe. I know Europe, we know Jonathan's in Asia. So I said earlier, what a beautiful thing that we can put our arms around each other in this intimate way and bring the community together. I'm going to start from the beginning. John, that first session of yours. Now, I am known as somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. I love adventure sports. I do crazy things, but that first session sounded to me somewhat traumatic. And I have to ask you, I'm not sure many people, including myself, would have gone back. What made you go back? Was it your mother saying, now listen, John, you got to go back. I grew up with a Jewish mother and father, so I know what it's like. And I would never let my mama down. So what made you go back?
You know, it's now pretty close to 60 years since that day when I decided to go back. And I don't think a month has gone by where I haven't rethought it. Of course, the book made me turn what was confusion in my mind into some kind of story, narrative. I had to come up with something. You just can't write a book. Well, I went back. I have no idea. And I mean, it's a great question. I think it's not particularly my question. I think it's almost everyone's question. What made you teach? Why did you turn to this role? Why did all the people that I see in front of me on the screen, why did they elect to become teachers or studio owners, or why do they elect to go to work every day? I mean, these are all tough questions, and maybe they don't submit to a clear explanation. What got me back was my body, not my mind. Because if I thought about it, I would never have gone back. I went back because there was something inside of me that said, you need this. And that's all it said. And, you know, it sounds crazy when I'm talking about my body talking to me. But there was, you know, we all are driven by needs that we aren't completely aware of most of the time. This was one of them. I knew there was something there, and I didn't know whether it was Joe, whether it was the exercises, whether it was getting out of the house early in the morning and doing something that I thought would make me feel better during the day. I didn't know specifically, but I certainly knew that if I listened to my head, I wouldn't have gone back. But if I just said, just do, let it happen. And the second thing was, and I talk about this a little, and this is the easy answer, when you don't do something, that it's over. The option is gone. When you do it, you can always quit later. So, I mean, that was in my mind. All right, I'll go back. If I don't like it the second time, I quit. I can always quit. But if I don't go back, I've already quit. So I kept pushing the option forward. In other words, I didn't decide either to quit or go back. I decided to procrastinate my decision. And I think that's what happened. And once I went back the second time, there was never any question in my mind. And I think a lot at that point shifted toward Joe, toward how he taught, toward his positive reinforcement, toward the idea that I wasn't taking a test, I was trying to achieve anything, a better forehand in tennis, better putting on the, I was just doing something that felt good. And those factors, I think, played into what I was looking for. I was a bit lost in life, and I sensed that maybe there'd be some help here, answers.
Right.
And that's why I went back.
Great answer. I love that. John, did the routine that he gave to different people vary very much, or was it a set routine? And I'm relating my question specifically to the people that we call the first generation teachers, several who I had the great pleasure of knowing very well, Ron and Romana and Eve, and the person who I was closest to, Kathy Grant, who became a very dear friend and a mentor to me. But those people, I knew them so well. I had the pleasure of spending time with them, studying to a greater or lesser degree with all four of them. And I wonder, did their routines when they came in, or whoever you would meet in the studio, were their routines very different and individual, or was it very much a one-size-fits-all?
Well, from my viewpoint alone, and I'm different from all of them, because all of them very quickly let Joe know that they were interested in learning how to teach Pilates.
Right.
It was clear with me, I hadn't the slightest interest in that at all. The routine that I and everyone else that I observed, because you couldn't talk to anyone else or meet anyone else, as you just said, was exactly the same, exactly the same. And if you look at the photograph of the studio, the one I have in the book is quite old. It's before my time. But the walls in the studio were exactly the same from that photograph as when I got there. When you were obligated to learn his routine so you could do it yourself. You didn't have a private lesson. You didn't have a class. You didn't have an appointment. So you struggled at the beginning hard to learn the routine. And you had to learn one routine you had to learn a mat and you had to learn a reformer. The guillotine and other things, trapeze and stuff, and the chair and the ladder barrel, they were almost time killers for you, waiting to get on a reformer or even a mat when it was crowded. But when you got stuck, there was no one there to help you. They were in the background, and if Joe was there, he'd see you were stuck, or Clara would see you were stuck. They were trained to leave alone, to watch you struggle. It must have been painful for some of them, and what you did, and you couldn't ask the person next to you because you couldn't talk. It was completely forbidden to talk to anyone. So you got off the machine and off the reformer, and you went to the rear wall, and you looked down the photographs. You say, "Oh yeah, all right, I just did the 100, and what? Oh, that's shaving, or that's hug free. All right, I'll do that now." And then sometimes that would clue you in enough to get you going for 5 or 6 more, and then you stop or get stuck and you do the same thing. And sometimes you got so stuck you couldn't do anything else, and you just stood there really foolishly. I mean, you were just stuck, and they'd come over and help you then. I mean, they wouldn't let you sink, but you certainly made you bob up and down in the water a few times. The other thing you got stuck on, but you learned to figure it out, was the springs. There were 4 springs. They were all of equal strength. There weren't blue, red, yellow, and green. I'm colorblind, so it's fine with me, the colors. But there were 4 springs, and the bar had 2 positions, and the foot bar had 1 or 2 positions in my day. The headrest had 1 position, and the positions were easy enough to figure out, but the springs were not. So you get up, you say, "Oh, okay, I've been going, let's see, now I'm going to do leg circles." Okay. And you go back to the machine, you lie back down, you put your feet in the straps, no one would help you. And you had 1 spring in there. And all of a sudden you swing your legs around and the carriage is flying back and forth like crazy. Say, "It ain't 1 spring. It's got to be more than that." So you'd put another in, or you'd put 2 in. And pretty soon, your body would tell you in advance, "Oh, okay, leg circles, I see that, boom." And usually once you went through this process, just once you got stuck and you struggled your way through and no one came to your assistance, you didn't get stuck there anymore. You'd get stuck somewhere else. And with, over time, you didn't get stuck anymore. And, it's now, 57 years since I started with this. And I can get on a reformer, and yeah, Rael, you'll say, "Oh, come on, you could point your legs a little more, you can do this." But the one thing you will say is, "Jesus, this routine call. I don't have to do a thing." And I can do that to this day, because I didn't learn it by memory. I learned it by fighting my way through it. And that's why the routine, to answer your question, for all of us was exactly the same. Now, if you had a prima ballerina, or if you had an opera singer, and they were concerned about certain things, yes, he may have well changed the routine. And he did add as time went on. And sometimes you'd get used to doing your leg circles with 3 springs. You get used to it, and he or Bob Seed or Hannah or John Winter would come over and say, "Hey, try it on 2. Well, try it on 1. And eventually someone might even say, "Hey, you could do that on no springs at all." And that's how the exercise got more and more difficult, and you felt you were, you were learning about how your body worked by all this. And at the end, he would add on stuff from time to time, but he rarely ever changed the order of it or ever changed the exercises within the order. And a little point on that, it wasn't a series of exercises. And it's hard to get that in your head. It wasn't like you did the leg work and then you went to the 100 and then you went to the leg circles or the arm circle. It was you got on the reformer and 45 minutes later or an hour, you got off. Everything in between was as important as everything you were doing. So, I mean, and this is important for, people who want to keep that pace going. The in-between was like the in-between between notes in music. It was part of the music. It wasn't, oh, okay, you get off the machine and you figure out what you do next and you pick up the box. No, it's you get off the machine a certain way, you swing your legs or you're not going to hit the person next to you, and you get off the machine and you walk to the rear, take 2 steps to the rear of the reformer, you pick up the box by both handles, you turn it sideways, you put it down, you get back on the machine. It was all part of the same thing. And once you got that, you felt pretty good about it. You could do a routine, anywhere, anytime.
John, is it safe to say Joseph Pilates was a creative man? And as a creative being, his work would have inevitably evolved and changed over the years?
I think that's the fairest comment I've ever heard on that. And I am an enormous believer in that. And I have made a point of that every time I've spoken before teachers. And I'm always happy to make that point. The reason we're all here today, the reason I even have an audience for the book, much less a webinar, is because so many creative people and so many people who want to help others, really, who want to teach, who enjoy the physical aspects of life and helping people with that, have jumped on this, found a place where they can personally add, not copy, add their creativity to this very basic exercise routine. And yes, it's again going back to a musical analogy. When Bach wrote some of his most beautiful pieces, it was for a harpsichord and for very primitive musical instruments. And he didn't think, oh boy, that for now, I wrote that and I wrote it for a harpsichord and a wood flute, one key on it, and nobody for the rest of time is ever going to play that on any other kind of instrument or modify it. And then, of course, other people came along and said, Bach had all this crazy stuff with the chords and the this and the that, but I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then you had a Beethoven, and then you had a Dvorak, and then you had whatever. I mean, you had Leonard Bernstein, you had all this chain of people that took an enormous amount of creativity, like Joe had, and kept fiddling with it and kept adding to it and adding their own creativity. No one would do this. I don't think anyone would, certainly not the crowd that is in front of me or has been in front of me for a few weeks now. No one would go into this thinking they had to teach it exactly the way Joe did it every single day, and they couldn't add to it, or they couldn't change, make a modification in any of the equipment that would make it easier to teach or easier to learn. It's a hugely dynamic activity. He was creative in the sense that he had, you know, you think of Picasso, had insight of things people didn't. You know, Picasso to be able to get 3 dimensions on a canvas, and no one else had really tried it. They tried perspective, but they didn't have the eye behind in front, so that when you looked into. So the whole point I'm making is he found something really basic. He built on it. He was, and that's a failing in my opinion, he was unbelievably rigid about adherence to that. But even Romana, the next person, couldn't stick to it. She had ballet in her. Joe had no ballet in him. So she had years of studying ballet and teaching ballet and dealing with ballet. And so when she saw movement, she brought that to bear. She brought her creativity. Ron Fletcher, well, Kathy too had a great dance. Carolla had different dance. Mary added a whole psychological aspect to it, a whole dreamlike quality to it. And Ron comes along, and Ron was a dancer, but he was, what he really was an incredible choreographer. I mean, he choreographed the ice capades. He couldn't skate. He couldn't walk out on the ice without falling on his butt. But he could create these great things on ice. So what was he going to do? Teach the way Joe taught? He didn't even like the way Joe taught. He didn't like Joe. And he liked Clara a lot. He loved Clara. But so what was he going to do in life? Oh, I'm going to spend my whole life teaching exactly the way Joe taught me those first 5 sessions until I told him I wanted to work only with Clara. I'm going to do that. No, of course he's not going to do it. And what he did was he added his, he added his Elizabeth Larkin. All she's interested in is how to fix broken people. That's what she wants to understand. How do you fix people who are hurt or damaged or had surgery? So she's going to say, well, I'm just going to apply this method, whether it works or not. Of course not. So the reason you're all here, and the reason I'm here, and the reason this is such a vibrant, compelling thing, is the gates were opened for you to exercise your creativity and put your energy and your needs into teaching and helping. And yes, the answer is he was creative, but it was the base. And it's taken a mountain of creativity to be added on top of it to get where we are today, and it's going to keep going.